Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today we're going to be talking through a second episode here of 5 must-avoid players for the 2022 fantasy football season. I've got an entire separate list of 5 other players we've already talked about for this offseason, so go check that video out. I will try to do my best to remember to link that in the cards. But before we get into today's video, I want to let you guys know stuff that's going around here on the channel. So go down in the description of today's episode. I'll probably also pin a comment in the comment section as well. Check out SFS Weekly. It's going to be a once per week email service where I'm going to send out all kinds of updates about new content drops on my website, sizzlefantasy.com, opportunities to play in fantasy leagues with me this season. And we are just a few days away from the first piece of free and exclusive content for SFS Weekly subscribers only. So those are going to be my top 10 secrets to dominate your 2022 fantasy football leagues. Again, SFS Weekly, I will link that in the pin section in the comments and the description of today's episode. Also, go check out Underdog Fantasy. If you want a free draft guide on my website, sizzlefantasy.com, you're going to get access to redraft, dynasty, sleepers, busts, redraft rankings, positional rankings, all that great stuff on sizzlefantasy.com. Absolutely free when you check out Underdog Fantasy. Sign up, deposit, and use promo code SFS. It's right there on the screen, also in the description of today's episode. So go check all that stuff out. A lot of great stuff in the description as always, and let's jump into today's video. As we get started today, I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to all of you guys who have been dropping in and popping in each of the videos here recently on the channel, commenting, interacting with the community. It's been great. I appreciate the heck out of you guys. Let's have a great season. As always, I want you guys to join the community and interacting with myself. I strive to be the most interactive fantasy football channel on YouTube. So by all means, if you have a question, an opinion, a take, a question about your NFL team, if it's not fantasy related, that is all awesome to me. Put that stuff in the comment section of today's or any video you watch here on the channel. I'm happy to get back to you guys, chat fantasy football with you. We've got a Discord server with a ton of different channels and pages in there to have different conversations about unique topics. I love talking to you guys, so don't feel like you can't ask me a question or that I won't get back to you, because I always truly intend to respond to your guys' stuff. So drop that in the comment section, put it in the Discord server, and like today's video, and subscribe if you're around here. We're super glad that you stopped by the channel and found today's episode. But the first player that I want to talk about today is definitely going to be a hot take for some. I got a lot of flack for this last year, which is kind of absurd to say that possibly the best quarterback in the National Football League has made my must-fade list and is a player that I'm avoiding for back-to-back consecutive fantasy football seasons. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with Patrick Mahomes, the football player. Again, I just told you, I think he's arguably the best the best NFL quarterback, not fantasy, that's why we're talking about him today. Arguably the best, actually, football player in the National Football League. Now, for fantasy, I'll take Josh Allen, and you can have your debate because there's a lot of great quarterbacks in today's game right now. But Patrick Mahomes is not somebody I'm interested in drafting because of his ADP. It's, again, nothing to do with the player. This guy has all the tools you look for. He's a phenomenal playmaker. His upside, his arm talent, he has athleticism. Patrick Mahomes brings such a positive skill set and reputation to the table here, but you see the ADP up on the screen. It's actually a little bit lower in best ball formats, which is where that's pulled from, Underdog Fantasy. Again, promo code SFS, and get the draft guides free on sizzlefantasy.com. That helps me out a lot, you guys. So I want to get you guys hooked up with those draft guides this year, and then if you deposit on Underdog, you can draft and play in leagues with me this season. But Pat Mahomes in actual, we're talking season-long leagues where you are setting your lineup every week, where you are having active decision-making processes that go into your weekly lineup. His ADP is actually a little bit higher, and you'll see that reflected on formats like Sleeper Fantasy, ESPN, Yahoo, NFL Fantasy, all that great stuff. So why is Patrick Mahomes someone I'm fading? Why is he someone I'm avoiding? Why does he make the list for today's 5 must-avoid players? Now, again, the simple thing here is the value is not there. I think that when we saw that 2018 MVP season with 50 passing touchdowns, the wow plays, the unimaginable things that this guy does in terms of, again, being an immensely talented football player, I think we're still kind of grasping onto that memory and thinking that is the player and the fantasy production that we're getting. Although the evolution of the Chiefs' offense has been drastically shifted and changed here this offseason, although the numbers haven't quite been to that level in the years since, And I think we need to take a real look in the mirror here and accept that Patrick Mahomes is just not worth it at his draft value this year. Now, again, I'm going to say this, and I feel like I've repeated myself grossly, but this is something that last year I found a lot of people had negative things to say in the comment section about because they couldn't get past the idea of fading Patrick Mahomes because he is such an amazing player. But when you're talking about a guy who in those redraft formats is going as a top 3-round pick, in best ball he's a very early 4th-round pick, it's just too much. There are better options on the table, and when you look at the situation and how it's evolved in the previous, what are we into year 4 now since that MVP season, there are reasons not to like him. The first of which being he has not cracked the 40 touchdown threshold since that 2018 50 touchdown performance in that season. So you're seeing a significant touchdown drop-off that's maintained its level of consistency now. It's not to say that he can't break through that barrier again. However, I'm having a really hard time envisioning a world in which Patrick Mahomes improves statistically from 2021 to 2022. The obvious reason for which is Tyreek Hill is no longer a Kansas City Chief. That's the big ticker here that swings the pendulum back farther in the negative direction for Patrick Mahomes with me. And I just don't think that they can replace that production, that offensive upside he brings to the table, the explosiveness, the ability to have free big plays downfield. I mean, having the luxury of a guy in Tyreek Hill who could simply just run past a guy or, catch a short ball and take it the distance because of his athleticism and upside as a player, it's too much to overlook here, and I don't think we can understate it. I'm really confident in guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore. I think MVS will bring a little bit to the table here in terms of being a vertical weapon, but I don't think that those guys can truly replace what Tyreek Hill meant to this offense. You're talking about needing a combination of 3 players to try and attempt to replace what Tyreek meant to this offense. I don't think you're going to have the same product on the field, and you're especially not going to have that vertical presence to the extent that Tyreek Hill was. Now, again, MVS is a vertical pressing player, but then he gives you nothing else in the underneath game, which is something that Tyreek Hill was very potent in terms of his danger that he presents to defenses on all areas of the field. So when I look at the quarterback landscape surrounding Patrick Mahomes, I see guys like Justin Herbert, who in best ball is going a little ahead of Mahomes. In redraft leagues, it's a bit more iffy. And then Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts are my next 2 guys after that. And I just think that I would much rather pass on Patrick Mahomes and take someone else in the late 3rd or early 4th round. It's just too much for me. I don't want to invest myself with that high of draft capital into a player that I don't think can outperform what he did last year, and that was a top 6 quarterback finish in fantasy points per game. But I don't see him exceeding that marker, and if we're going to draft him as the QB2 or the QB3 this season, why would we do that when, again, he finished as the QB6 in points per game last year, but should statistically see some minor regression? It's not like Pat's going to fall off the face of the earth. It's not like he's going to have this wildly disappointing season. But you're talking about this is a early round draft pick. You want to get some bang for your buck here. You want a guy that's going to give you, you can find legitimate league-winning prospects on this area of the board, and Patrick Mahomes is not that player. We know what he is at this point. We know what realistic expectations are, and if we're thinking straight and thinking clearly, expecting Patrick Mahomes to have a top 3 fantasy finish with the weapons he has at his disposal would be very foolish and naive to think that that would be an outcome that would happen this season. David Montgomery is my number 2 player on the board here. Now, his ADP is 54.7. So moving a little bit down the board here, this is the first running back in today's episode. And I just got to say, I feel for the man, David Montgomery. This is a guy who I think is actually a very capable player of being a high-volume workhorse in an NFL offense. However, the Chicago Bears have not been kind to their offensive core this offseason. Now, not only did, yes, they removed Matt Nagy from the situation, which take that as a pro or a con, whatever you want to do. I'm just going to look at it from a very simplistic standpoint and say you removed an offensive head coach and replaced him with a head coach on the defensive side of the ball. So already I'm starting to see some things that I don't love there. Now, that's not necessarily ever a make or break situation for a player in fantasy football. You can certainly see guys thriving in situations where the head coach is a defensive mind. And that's not to say that, there's obviously guys like David Montgomery last season, who had an offensive coach and their offense did not produce to a high standard. However, that's red flag number one. When your offense was already sputtering and your replacement plan is to bring someone in from the other side of the football where you are historically a defensive-minded organization. The second thing here is he's been plagued with severe offensive inefficiency. And what I mean by that is the Bears offense last year was horrific to watch. If you ever tried to sit through a Bears game, it is insanely boring, and you go mad watching the game because it just turns into a defensive war, whether the opposing defense is good or not. Chicago's defense is always very sound, and you've got a lot of punting and not very much scoring. So with David Montgomery here, you're not getting long, extended drives, at least not until farther down the stretch of the season when Justin Fields really started to click in particular, and this was honestly a bigger game for Darnell Mooney, but he did look very good in that performance against Pittsburgh. I believe that was a Monday night game last year. But the point being here is that Chicago was not scoring many points, they were not sustaining long drives, and they were not giving David Montgomery a high level of opportunities to produce noteworthy fantasy production. Now, yes, he did finish as an RB2. He was the RB12 in fantasy points per game. However, I would argue that this situation has actually gotten worse. How did that happen? Well, you let arguably your best offensive player in Allen Robinson walk out the door. You replaced him with a 25-year-old rookie in Velus Jones. And according to RotoWire, the Chicago Bears have the 32nd and worst ranked offensive line core in the National Football League. So I will throw a couple stats your direction to kind of emphasize just how bad this unit was for Montgomery last year, despite the fact that, again, this is a bona fide workhorse who is seeing ridiculous volume and opportunity, a 74.8% snap share in this Bears offense, which ranks second amongst running backs. Montgomery yet struggled and had 43rd ranked yards per carry numbers, meaning of all the 32 teams in the National Football League, he ranked below all the starters there, and you have to qualify for this stat. So it's not like you can touch the ball once, get 70 yards, and that's your average. There is a minimum rushing attempts threshold here. David Montgomery ranked below all the starters in the National Football League and about another third down on that list. So very, very inefficient numbers in the rushing department for David Montgomery last season. I went and looked back at the 2020 year because he finished very hot and actually had a high RB finish that season. So I was looking to see what the two difference makers were or what the collective unique spots were in that season to kind of swing the pendulum a little bit. There was only a 3-touchdown regression from the 2020 season to 2021, despite the large discrepancy in points. And what I actually found is that David Montgomery in the 2020 year, where he was number 6 in fantasy points per game, was top 5 in both rushing and receiving yards at the running back position. So he was getting significantly more production in that area of the offense, and he was also seeing an unprecedented 90% opportunity share at the running back position for Chicago, which again speaks to how high caliber of a workhorse running back he is as a player, and how, again, ridiculous that number is. And he was still ranked in the low 30s for rushing attempts per carry, or rushing yards per carry. So he was still inefficient that season, but the workhorse volume added up. He was able to, again, produce top 5 numbers in rushing and receiving for running backs, and then had that 90% opportunity share, which fell down to 80% this season. Another startling thing, I've got kind of a scratchy voice today. Another thing I wanted to note before we move on here is that every season since his rookie year in 2019, David Montgomery has played fewer games. So yes, he is a workhorse. Yes, he's going to see a lot of touches. However, you're seeing that wear and tear start to nag on him down the stretch of these seasons. And yes, some of these injuries are freak injuries. I think that the knee issue this year wasn't necessarily like an injury-prone thing. I think it was just, he happened to get tangled up and whatnot. But that is something to keep in the back of your mind as well, is that games played number has decreased each season. So if you're giving me the worst offensive line in the league, an offense that I think got worse this offseason, and a team that I think is just going to be sputtering offensively, trying to get the train on the tracks here, David Montgomery is someone that I'm going to take some peeks at other positions like an Ezekiel Elliott, a Travis Etienne, who are both running backs at roughly similar ADPs that I would prefer. Otherwise, you've got Darren Waller, Deontay Johnson, and Marquise Hollywood Brown as alternative positions that I think are all strong picks at this similar area on the board. DK Metcalf, the man, you see him there. He is a big dude, athletic, explosive, all the things you like to see. However, I will also be staying away from him. His ADP on Underdog Basketball Fantasy, again, promo code SFS to get the draft guides free this season, is 45.7 on their platform. So you're talking about a player who is going in pretty much the late 4th round here. So most of the players in today's video are 4th through 6th round pieces. Pat did kind of squeeze into the late 3rd on occasion, but again, late 3rd to 6th round prospects in today's video. But the thing with DK Metcalf here is I am extremely worried about the situation. Now, this is not even going to really cover too much in depth the concerns about his contract issue, which has popped up the last couple of days here with him still rehabbing his injury late last season and obviously now in a dispute because he wants an extension or a deal or potentially to be moved by the Seattle Seahawks. We're not even really going to focus on that too much because at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to materialize and result in anything too significant. But if you get really like superstitious or anxious about stuff, that's just one more thing on your plate here to can keep yourself concerned with. But QB play is the big thing for me here. So you're talking about going from Russell Wilson, one of the best deep ball passers in the NFL, to Drew Lock. And for a guy who needs to be insanely efficient, he needs to have a lot of air yards, the opportunity to make a lot of big plays downfield, and to be a weapon in the red zone. I don't think that this combination is going to work super, super well. This is a guy who's never had more than 83 receptions in an individual season during his 3-year career to this point. He's entering into year 4, and again, a contract year, which is why he wants to make that money. Same thing with Deebo Samuel here. However, when you're not getting peppered with targets and seeing a safe floor value on a week-to-week basis, you need to have that efficiency. It is vital to your fantasy dependability and ability to find success here. And when I went and looked, what I found is that Drew Lock has a 27% deep ball completion percentage, meaning just about a quarter of the time that he throws a ball downfield, that pass is actually being completed and converted into yards. I don't think that bodes very well for DK Metcalf. That was ranked below all starters in the NFL in 2020. He actually had equal numbers, 27% deep ball completion percentage in both 2020 and 2021. He did not qualify to be ranked this past season because he didn't have enough attempts. However, in the season, again, 2020, that he did qualify, he was ranked outside of the top 32, meaning there were 32 other starting quarterbacks better than him in that metric. Russell Wilson's number in that category for statistical comparison here is 36.4% completion on those deep ball passes. So you're talking about a 10% jump in converting about a third of those deep looks as opposed to about a quarter. So there's a significant step off the stairs there. Russell Wilson was in the top 22 of that metric, so not amazing. And he actually did have a high volume of deep passes that year because Seattle was putting up points and needing a lot of them because their defense was not giving them too much help on that side of the ball. But the moral of the story here is DK is not going to see elite volume. Therefore, he needs to be efficient at a very high or above average level. And I don't think Drew Lock's the guy who's able to deliver that. And if we see a guy like Geno Smith as well, I might even have less faith in Geno Smith to deliver deep balls on a consistent basis. J.K. Dobbins is my next name here, another running back. We're going to have one more in today's video. Now, I am probably... I'm not going to speak for people I don't know, but I was going to say I'm one of the biggest J.K. Dobbins fans out there in terms of as a player, but I don't actually know that to be a fact, so whatever. Besides the point, I love J.K. Dobbins. At Ohio State, he was fantastic, super explosive, absolutely just ran through opponents, and was one of the most electric players in the 2020 draft class. But this season for fantasy football, I'm quite concerned about what his outlook really looks like here. And the main reason, and you know, kind of an obstacle and a hurdle in my way and yours as well, is it's kind of tough to evaluate the situation to truly know what it's going to look like this year because for both JK and his immediate number one reserve option, Gus Edwards, neither played last year. They both had season-ending injuries in the preseason, and we never saw them hit the football field. So you're talking about players who are essentially, you're going over a year back in history trying to take that information and project it 2 years into the future. So with that qualification and all that settled there, basically what we have here is that in his rookie year, J.K. Dobbins had a 46.9% snap share. He was number one in yards per touch. Now, When I say those two things and when I saw those two numbers, the first thing that popped into my mind was Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is a player who is a low-end RB1 in fantasy because year over year he maintains an elite level of efficiency in terms of yards per touch. I believe he was 6th overall, or he was either 4th or 6th in that metric this season. And he had 51.7% of the Cleveland Browns snap share. Neither J.K. Dobbins nor Nick Chubb are going to be excessively involved in the receiving game for their football teams. Now, J.K. could come out here and completely drop my jaw to the floor and stun me and catch a bunch of balls this year, but that is not my expectation for how the Ravens will use him. So, going forward, if J.K. wants to hit on his ADP, to hit on his upside, he is going to need to be ridiculously efficient with those rushing attempts. He's going to need to score a high volume of touchdowns in order to keep him afloat in terms of having a good upside without catching too many balls. And he's going to have to hope that the others in this Ravens backfield, which I would argue is very much so a committee, don't carve out too much of a role for themselves. Much like Kareem Hunt, who is a goal line vulture in Cleveland, steals a lot of touchdowns from Nick Chubb, eats into his workload a significant amount, and obviously has a large snap count percentage for that Browns football team. Gus Edwards had a 33.5% snap count percentage in 2020, and he had 8 goal line carries, which out-touched Dobbins 8-6. So +2 to Gus Edwards on the goal line, which, as I just said, is a bit of a red flag. Now, the other part of this is we need to manage our expectations. Close your eyes for a second. Think back to last offseason if you played fantasy football, and think about Saquon Barkley. Now, Saquon was more highly touted last season than J.K. is coming into this year. Saquon is a guy who we all think of as this elite explosive athlete, which I would argue that while J.K. is not nearly on that level, he is also a very, very explosive and elite level athlete. Did Saquon Barkley deliver on expectations? No, he did not. At least that is, as a Saquon Barkley owner in a couple leagues last year, that is my opinion, and I would say that I feel pretty comfortable speaking for the greater fantasy community with that assessment. So, yes, you do have a discrepancy in terms of where the draft positioning is for these two players. However, I don't think J.K. would have been picked nearly as high as Saquon was last year had he never had an injury in the first place. So essentially what I'm saying all this to then turn around and say here is that we have to be cautiously optimistic in our assessment of J.K. Dobbins. We can't go overboard, expect him to deliver on too much upside, because the reality of the situation is he's been rehabbing for the last 9 to 12 months. Ever since that injury occurred in the preseason last August, I believe that was, he's been working on getting back to full strength and becoming a 100% ready NFL player for week 1 of the 2022 season. Just like Saquon was doing a season ago. And now as we move into 2022, I'm much more optimistic about Saquon at his 3rd round ADP as a guy who has been training for over a year as opposed to rehabbing. So it's almost the mental process, the preparation component of J.K. Dobbins' season and the situation he lands in that gives me the most caution here. Again, Gus Edwards had arguably a more devastating injury with his Achilles tear, and is a player far less explosive than Dobbins is to begin with. But you've also got Mike Davis, Justice Hill, and Tyler Beatty, who I think that between Justice Hill and Tyler Beatty will factor into the receiving game and eat up some volume there. And maybe Mike Davis comes in here and snatches up some of that work from Gus Edwards, Gus the Bus, before he's able to come back and be 100% of his true self. But at similar ADPs, at roughly the same picks on best ball right now, I'd rather have Breece Hall, and this goes for really redraft as well, but Breece Hall, Jerry Jeudy, Gabe Davis, Amari Cooper, and Rashad Bateman. J.K. Dobbins kind of falls into a ripe land and a ripe spot on the draft board for drafting wide receivers. The 5th round, I think, has very, very awesome names that can potentially be drafted there. So Dobbins for me is a pass right now. I'm worried again because I don't expect him to be a workhorse. He's going to be a guy that gets 16, let's say 15 to 17 touches per game. Needs to be really efficient and needs to score the rock and crack the 100-yard marker and be tops in the NFL in rushing yardage. And I think it's just asking a lot of a player to deliver on such a high level coming off of such a significant injury. So I'll be managing my expectations with J.K. Dobbins this season. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comment section below. And then finally here, number 5 on the list for today's video. If you're enjoying, make sure to drop down, click that subscribe button, turn the bell on so you never miss an episode like this one. We'll be posting 2 videos tomorrow to cap off this week. But Antonio Gibson, if the ADP doesn't spook you enough, 666 there, you've got a guy who I think really got kicked in the balls this season by the Washington football team organization. I don't know what it was about J.D. McKissic that gave him the cold feet to sign with the Buffalo Bills, a perennial Super Bowl contender with Josh Allen. Having the quarterback play and the offensive upside and ceiling that group has, he gets cold feet and wants to come back to the Washington Commanders. I think I said football team earlier. For comfort. Like that's where he came. To Dan Snyder, the leaky stadium, pipes and poop, water bursting all over fans in the stands, the cursed football field that snaps quarterback legs in half like twigs. I don't know what it was about J.D. McKissic's thought process there, but he decided to come crash the party for Antonio Gibson, and not only did he do that, the Washington Commanders just cocked one back and gave a big ol' smack to Gibson in terms of some situational role usage by drafting Brian Robinson Jr. in the 3rd round, which I think a lot of people are grossly overlooking. Now, Antonio, for me, is still going to be the guy. He's going to have the early 1st and 2nd down usage. He is going to be the starter for this team and the lead back for this offense. But there's a lot of valuable work for this football team that he is going to be barely fighting and scraping to keep his foot in the door to have usage in not only the passing game, but the goal line in 3rd and short yard situations as well. You've already got a loss here for Antonio Gibson with J.D. McKissic returning to this situation. I went and checked the numbers from last season. Gibson had a 56.3% snap share, which is okay. It's not necessarily workhorse level work, but it is something. 56.3 is fine. Again, I was just complaining about a Nick Chubb who has a 51.7% snap share, so it's better than Nick Chubb. However, what I hate to see here is that for Antonio Gibson, you've got 10.4% of the target share in Washington, and McKissic has 14.7% of that target share. So we know J.D. McKissic is more involved as a receiver than Antonio Gibson is. That is just a fact. Again, look at the numbers last season. McKissic was targeted more. He had a larger share of the target volume in that offense. That's a red flag. For Antonio Gibson, part of the reason that I loved him so much last year, was so bullish on him and thought that he could, reach for the stars as a fantasy RB1, is that pass-catching role. At Memphis, he played the wide receiver position. He's clearly equipped with the skill set to do that job, and they're just not using him as much as they could be in that phase of things here with the Commanders. So that's the first big blow. The second thing is you bring in a guy in Brian Robinson Jr., who is a tank, one of the bigger running backs in this year's draft class. And he's a guy who, when I did my evaluation of Brian Robinson as a player, I like to watch a lot of things. I like to see use cases for getting guys in the field and opportunities for them to earn part of that snap share for themselves. And one thing I noticed is he is a phenomenal pass protector. And when I already think about J.D. McKissic being the primary option to, yes, he will line up in the slot as an extra receiver, and it doesn't always mean that Gibson's coming off the field when McKissic is out there. But when I talk about, having McKissic, maybe it is. J.D. lines up and splits out wide in the slot, and you've got Gibson in the 2021 season staying in to pass protect. Brian Robinson Jr. could easily find himself in that situation, coming out of the field and just being a big barrel that someone has to run through, which I don't think they will, because, again, he is very stout in the pass protecting game. That just takes away another opportunity for Gibson to get on the field on 3rd down. You also talk about 3rd and short situations, goal line opportunities. Not that Gibson won't be involved in this portion of the offense, but Brian Robinson Jr. will take a piece of that pie. He will split that pie. Let's say he even takes just a third of that work, and Antonio Gibson sees his 10 total touchdowns and his number 4 ranked 52 red zone touches decrease by, 20% or 33%, whatever the number is. That number is probably going to decline this upcoming season. Even if I told you that he regressed, look at the difference between David Montgomery, his top 6 points per game RB finish in 2020 with 10 touchdowns versus his RB finish this year with just 7. So that marker is going to be a big deal for Antonio Gibson this year. Additionally, before we've got all of these rushing yardage truthers coming into the comment section and telling me that, yes, Antonio Gibson ran for 1,037 rush yards last year, I did the math, I calculated things out, and in standard scoring, or, standard PPR, half PPR, wherever it is, rushing yardage output is all the same across those formats. That is 6.46 fantasy points per week rushing between the games played for Antonio Gibson and the total rushing output. So you got to give me something somewhere else, whether that is red zone production, whether that is production in the receiving game. But, you got to find a way to get me to, at least if I'm going to be drafting him here at his draft position, I want to see 10 to 12 fantasy points per game. So you're probably not going to get that this season is my thought and my expectation at this point in time. Some people will undervalue the roles of J.D. McKissic and Brian Robinson in this offense, but I'm someone that believes a lot in their utility to this football team, and I don't think that they're just going to be, space fillers on this roster. So those are 5 must-avoid players for today's video. Hopefully you guys are seeing this the day I posted it. It's coming out a little bit later than usual, but if you're watching this later, that's besides the point. If you enjoyed today's video, found any of the content useful, drop down, click that like button, subscribe to the SFS channel. Also, if you want to get yourself hooked up with a free draft guide, sign up for Underdog Fantasy. You can get promo code SFS. It'll double your money, get you hooked up with that draft guide for free. And also go check out SFS Weekly. Again, I'll be dropping my 10 secrets to dominating your 2022 fantasy football leagues. And I'll be getting you guys some exclusive content for free every single week. So thank you guys for watching. Again, I appreciate the heck out of you. If you're still sticking with me for today's video, you are a true fan of the channel here, and I could not be more happy to have you guys around here. But I will see you guys tomorrow for our 2-part video series. Peace out.